Welcome everybody to today's session entitled Predictive Chemistry, the Holy Grail for Chemicals and Materials. It's presented by Alchemy and brought to you by Asterix Technology. And we can go to the next slide, please. A little bit about Asterix. We've been hosting a webcast series with thought leaders throughout the lab informatics industry now for several months, and we're bringing people in to provide their thoughts on the future of lab informatics, the future of laboratory technology in general. And we're very pleased to have a great presenter with us today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But why is Asterix doing this? What is our role in this industry? We are an informatics professional services and strategic outsourced solutions company dedicated to serving the scientific community. A couple of quick statistics about us. We were established in 1995, are privately held, and originated as an IT division of a company called APBI Life Science. It was a research organization. We operate from 7 offices in the United States and beautiful Costa Rica, and are headquartered in Red Bank, New Jersey. The people that we work with are typically Fortune 1000 life science enterprises, chemical, CPG, government research institutions, typically all that have large or fast-growing IT needs or outsourced and compliance needs. Our mission has always been and always will be to deliver scalable, sustainable solutions for the scientific community. And we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of where we fit in the, in the life cycle of scientific data systems, we provide services that span the entire life cycle. So from the beginning, we work with our customers to help them through business process analysis and enterprise architecture design. In other words, in layman's terms, we come in and we help a company understand the type of systems that they need and the type of technology stack that's going to support their growth, depending on a lot of things, where they're at, let's say, for example, in cloud migration, things along those lines. We can then engage in technology selection services and even go as far as development and implementation of those services where applicable. And when those systems are deployed, we can do the post-computer systems validation work. Beyond that, we provide complete laboratory systems services, like a managed services offering, where we can assist with things like making sure your systems are upgraded properly, training, ongoing resources such as that. And then finally, we have the capability of staffing both technical and scientific individuals into your organization. So that's a little bit about Asterix. We want to obviously turn it over to our presenters today. I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. We can go to the next slide. So we have Sasha Novakovich, which I hope I got your last name pronounced properly, Sasha, and Nikolai Milankovic. Sasha is the president and CEO of Alchemy, which is an enterprise software as a service company. Modernizing the $1 trillion specialty chemicals industry, a veteran of the tech industry and a founder and an investor, having started her first tech company back in 1999 and making her first venture investment in 2007. Her entry into the world of specialty chemicals and material sciences came in 2014 when she invested in a project management software for powder coatings. And she holds an undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley and MBA from Harvard Business School. So we're thrilled to have Sasha today. And Nikola is also going to be joined to assist with some of the questions or any technical questions that come up. He's a serial entrepreneur, software architecture with a passion for building high security, scalable cloud platforms. And he's the CTO of Alchemy. He leads the development of the core platform and manages a team of developers and data scientists. His team is building the only cloud platform purpose-built for the unique needs of the specialty chemicals industry. So some great minds with us today. And from here, I'm going to step back and let Sasha take the rest of the presentation.
Well, thanks so much, Kevin. We're really happy to be here. Just jumping right into the agenda, we wanted to talk about why product development is so important right now. Also, our view on predictive chemistry and its impact on the industry itself. There are some really legitimate factors that make it difficult to actualize, and I want to put them forward. And then also talk about what the audience can do to make predictive chemistry a reality in their respective organizations. So starting at a pretty existential level, we've been looking at some World Economic Forum data over the last decade, and what we noticed was pretty dramatic. And that is that over the last 10 years, the risks to humankind and the planet really have shifted from primarily geopolitical and economic to environmental and technological. So really, issues that we've kind of created for ourselves, and frankly, issues that we can address for ourselves as well. And we view these challenges really as commercial opportunities. So, As we look at the increasing environmental health and safety needs of people and the planet, and the increasing regulatory hurdles that products are going to need to face, we believe there are two kinds of product development that are going to really come to the fore. In the first case, it's defensive reformulation. So looking at products that are already in market, for which there are already potentially even very significant revenue streams coming in, and reformulating those so that those revenue streams can continue into the future and meet the new regulatory hurdles. And then secondly, and perhaps a little bit more exciting, is offensive new product development. What's clear is that even beyond environmental health and safety regulations and standards, market needs are changing. So both consumers and industrial buyers are expecting that products are going to be cleaner, greener, from renewable sources. And so there is a tremendous opportunity to create these new product categories and really be first to market. And with being first to market often comes intellectual property protection, and often comes significantly higher margins. And so this is the opportunity landscape that we really see coming onto the scene now in particular. This is a different way to think about the opportunity, which is that what we know today is a very small amount of what is knowable. And so we view the delta here as opportunity for commercial product development. And so it's just a different way to think about what the opportunity is that's at hand. I think the challenge for chemicals and materials companies really is at the heart of their innovation process and their product development process is a scientific method. And while specialty chemicals, material science are 1 trillion of a $5 trillion kind of global chemicals industry that would also include commodity chemicals and pharmaceuticals, we share this scientific method. And the reality is that because it is hypothesis driven and it is nonlinear, it can be very time consuming and very expensive, and there's no guarantee of success. We were really happy to come upon this McKinsey analysis that was done looking at 118 companies that were over 2 billion in sales on a global basis. What this data really confirmed is what I think a lot of people in the industry already know. It is a lot easier to create product line extensions in existing markets because we know the underlying chemistry, and we know the market needs so intimately, and we can make slight tweaks, do derivative product development relatively quickly and easily and cost effectively, and sell incrementally into the space. Now, what's a lot harder is, and what's in the upper right quadrant, is new product launches in new markets. And not surprisingly, what we see, because those success rates are significantly lower, is that the IRRs, the internal rates of return, are significantly lower than in all of the other boxes. And this is hugely problematic from an innovation perspective. On-top margin, just for clarity's sake, accounts for any sort of cannibalization that a new product might incur. So, the difference between 60% margin and 5% margin in the case of product line extension is dramatic. But the IRRs are very low because, again, the success rates are, could be 3 times lower, the costs are higher, and the time is longer. And all of those factors dramatically bring down the internal rate of return on the investment in that type of work. And really what we're trying to do from a business perspective at Alchemy is address the low IRRs in every quadrant, but in particular, to the extent that we can address them in this upper right quadrant, that would be the most meaningful for the industry. And this is why we're so excited about predictive chemistry. The legacy of our business is in workflow automation for the lab. However, it was always with the intent of generating AI-ready data for the purpose of running that through models so that we could be predictive. And what AI and ML will really do is de-risk new innovation and new product development projects significantly, because it can increase the speed and the time that it takes a company to get to revenue. So again, like really impacting the IRR calculations from the prior slides. Again, we believe that the companies that get to market first with new products in new spaces really have the opportunity to dominate those spaces. And so, those are the races that we're trying to facilitate. What's interesting is we talk to companies about data management and data infrastructure for their labs, and of course, being able to run AI with the data that's generated out of their labs, is that there are really 4 different approaches to AI. And often, companies might have backed themselves into one particular approach or have one particular approach in mind when they're thinking about AI, but I think it's useful to talk about every one because each have their own pros and cons. Each have their own requirements, and they are not mutually exclusive. So just starting at the top, bolt-on AI. I think bolt-on AI really is what the majority of companies think about when they're talking about AI. There's a tremendous amount, billions of dollars of venture investment that have gone into AI, AI-only companies, black box AI, bolt-on AI, and there are a lot of companies out there that are selling their solutions into the specialty chemical material science space, certainly. There are also generic AI platforms, and I think most people are familiar from a fame perspective with IBM's Watson. However, every major technology company from Amazon to Google to Microsoft have generic AI infrastructure platforms that can be leveraged if you have the people with the technical skills to be able to leverage them. The largest companies in the world seem to be going down the path of creating a data lake with their data and then running AI with data that comes from their data lake. And what this really means is taking disparate data from often many different functions, so it wouldn't even just be specific to the lab, but from many different data sources in the lab, trying to kind of clean and transform that data and get it into a single repository. And again, it requires the full stack of technical competencies, so people and processes, as well as the IT infrastructure. And then finally, running AI in an integrated ELN and LIMS platform. The approach here is actually probably the opposite of the data lake approach, and this is generate AI-ready data at the bench as it's being created, in real time as folks are doing their work. And then run AI within that, that set of applications that the lab staff are using. And again, these are not mutually exclusive. So, you could actually generate AI-ready data in the lab and then feed your data lake and have that AI-ready data be the source of truth for lab data, as an example, or you could run bolt-on AI in that integrated ELN and LIMS. So again, useful to understand different approaches to solve the problem, each with their own pros and cons. And again, some of these can really actually be running together and in parallel in a complementary fashion. We get this question all the time, and I thought this data was excellent in terms of providing an answer. And the question is, should I focus on my historical data or should I focus on my future data? And for companies that have long histories, often it's very enticing to deploy resources against digitizing and cleaning their historical data. And I see there's a natural tendency there because there's tremendous sunk cost in the generation of that information. And so a lot of times companies, especially companies with tremendous resources, really want to deploy resources against that kind of an effort. If you are a startup or you're a younger company or a middle market business that maybe doesn't have unlimited funds to do this kind of project work, the reality is, as you look at this chart, the vast majority of your data will quickly be the data that you're generating right now and in the future. And so, if you're a business that doesn't have unlimited, IT and technical resources, and you have to make a decision, you have to make a choice, really laying down the data infrastructure to collect AI-ready data going forward, is definitely the better bet. Again, if you have significant resources and you can do both, good for you, but that's not the vast majority of companies that are out there. So where to even start? Oftentimes we come into companies and they say, look, across the product life cycle, we have so many different categories of work that are being executed in the lab. Often these categories of work are being executed by different teams of people. And the reality is those different teams of people are using different software tools. And it's really difficult, almost overwhelming to figure out what is the right starting point. And what we have seen is that you can, in a very structured fashion, understand what that landscape is of activities and tools. We really view this as tech stack analysis. What's the technical stack? What are the technical tools that your teams of people are using across those various categories of work to capture data? And again, what you see here are different categories of data and the kinds of systems that these categories of data often reside in. We also see that in the biggest of companies, they may have several versions of the same software running that are all slightly different in different geographies. Oftentimes different geographies, especially if these companies have grown by acquisition, are running different vendors' software for the same category. But this matrix makes it really challenging, in addition to those categories of work, to address the problem. But if you can understand this picture, then you can actually address it. And what I would say that's a key takeaway for us is that the more software tools are in use, the more versions of software tools, even if it's the same company's tool that are in use, the more data degradation there is across the organization. Because inevitably what happens is you don't have the superset of information. You have versions of data that with slight tweaks, nothing is labeled consistently, so there's no consistent ontology. Often the data is entered into these systems and it's completely not validated, it's not formatted. And so what we find is that even though they may have a lot of quote unquote digital data, a lot of it is not particularly useful, it's not value added. And this really bears out. Chemical and Engineering News did a recent survey, and over 700 people responded to it about the importance of different elements of their lab data. And what you'll see is that, and this is on a 100% of respondents, so 97% of respondents said that it was of critical importance to find the data when they need the data. And that is not something that most people in labs are able to do today. And so, when you look at just how important proper data management is, it's tremendously important for people's ability to get their job done. And, as you'll see in coming slides, having great data infrastructure, we believe is essential, not just for enabling people to get their work done, to enable them to get their work done as efficiently as possible, and then also, very importantly, to run AI. So what is Alchemy? We are an integrated predictive chemistry platform. We basically digitize workflows across the product life cycle, and we embed features of ELN and LIMS right into those workflows, as well as the ability to be predictive. And we are able to do this very, very quickly because we use a NoCode platform to generate these applications. So we're not coding anything, we're just generating custom libraries of applications on behalf of each of our customers with their own custom ontology. And having your workflows digitized, having manual and cumbersome elements of work automated, and then being able to run either predictions or provide formulation recommendations, right within these applications provides tremendous time savings for lab staff. And that's really, coming from the combined power of human workflow automation and AI. And ultimately, if you can save time, then you really can decrease cost, and they typically go together. And this is a picture of the NoCode platform that we're using. Again, using a graphical user interface to build out workflows and to build out forms in which lab staff can work. So, over the course of our history, we've digitized all sorts of various versions of the top 40 workflows in labs, from innovation management through R&D, new product development, all the way through alternative raw materials assessments and so on. And we've also digitized the top 300 test methods that are out there, and that list is constantly growing. But that body of work is really important, because then all of a sudden you have this notion of the ways in which work can get done and the best practices associated with it. And again, the power is to not have to start from scratch in a digitalization effort for your lab, but also to be able to really customize to your organization, the way you work, your product categories, your underlying chemistries, your test methods, and your equipment in the lab. One of the things that really makes AI much more achievable for our customers is the fact that we are generating AI-ready data at the bench. So instead of taking in scans of people's paper lab notebooks and Excel files and trying to piece together information that might be residing in a formulating tool and some in ELN and some in LIMS, all of the information is already consolidated in one place. It is being validated on entry. Is this the right data? Is this kilograms or is this pounds? Is this a product in our materials database, or something new? The data is formatted. We're enforcing your custom ontology on every piece of data that comes into the system, whether a chemist is manually typing it into the application, or we're pulling it straight off of a piece of lab equipment, or we're pulling it from another piece of software. And having that ontology enforced on data entry in real time is extremely powerful, because having a consistent ontology then enables you to pull data very seamlessly subsequently, find the data that you want, reuse the data, etc. Context is really critical. So what were the process steps that needed to take place? What were the ambient conditions under which this test was run? This notion of complete is also critical. So the way I like to describe it is that, because we can provide people with easy to use templates, we can set a floor for data collection. We never want to set a ceiling, because we want people to be very, very creative. But having that floor is really critical, because then we know every time we pull test data for a certain test method that we know these 27 elements will always be included. We may have 37 elements, but at least those 27 will always be there. And that's our notion of complete, as an example. And then connected, the idea that all of these all of the records associated with all the steps in these workflows can also be connected, provides a tremendous amount of dimensionality to the data, so that we can assess with AI outputs, causes, and effects, and we can differentiate between factors that might be correlating and factors that might be causal. So again, being able to in real time generate AI-ready data at the bench really sets companies up for success. And I think this is a great overview slide that really looks at some of the different AI approaches that we mentioned earlier in the slide deck, and compares that to the generation of AI-ready data in real time. So again, instead of trying to take data from different places and clean it, what we're doing is generating the AI-ready data in real time for analysis in the moment, to optimize your operations, or to assess what's happening within a specific project, or ultimately to run AI. And we think for the majority of companies, whether you're using our AI or your own AI, frankly, because I think most companies will develop competency, with AI and ML, or you're working with a multitude of different parties to provide AI, your internal staff as well as outside parties, having that great data infrastructure to feed all of that is really, really critical. And that's the core of what we're providing. And we would view AI as kind of the frosting on the cake, if you will. And so this is a workflow, an AI workflow for Alchemy specifically. So there's some nuances to this workflow that may be a little different if you worked with a bolt-on AI provider, or if you were to do this yourself. So this really, being able to run AI really starts with data acquisition. And frankly, what I would say, because I always like to approach things from the business perspective, is that the most critical thing is actually to start with, well, what are the use cases even? Because the use cases are really going to drive what data you need to acquire and analyze. What we're doing, and again, this is a little specific to us, is some feature engineering, model training and testing, some parameter tuning, and then selecting models. Because the reality is that unlike some other companies, we don't have a preconceived notion that, for instance, Gaussian processes are the way to go every time because we're typically working in only one chemistry. Our customers span a massive range of product categories, and they have dramatically different underlying chemistries. So what we're trying to do is find the right model given the type of data that they want to run AI on. And you'll see lots of recursions here and steps to go back and iterate. So much like product development for a new material, you have to do some loops here to get to the best endpoint. Ultimately, what we do when we have selected the model and then we tune the model type that makes the most sense for the business problem or the scientific problem, we then embed that right into the AI that chemists use. They can use it at the bench for either predictions or recommendations. And then certainly to the extent that they are testing those formulation recommendations, any new test data that comes in can help us in terms of retraining and optimizing the model further on a go-forward basis. But key takeaway is that for, if you look at Gartner and a lot of the other research firms that are out there, the unfortunate reality for most companies is that data acquisition and data analysis, the data prep that goes in at that very top, is typically 80% of a typical AI project time. So if you can address that 80% out of the gate with AI-ready data from your lab, you're really off to the races as you move down the flowchart. This is a really simplistic example of a formulation record. And again, these are records that will be auto-generated, for lab staff. There are some automated calculations that are embedded here. But the key takeaways are that, all of the data that is entered here, it is getting validated. It is getting labeled appropriately. All the calculations are pre-set up, so there's no potential for a calculation error. All of these elements are really important in being able to collect as much data as possible. So unlike a lot of other systems where you're only collecting milestone formulations or final formulations, we believe that it's really critical to collect every trial formulation and all of the that samples test data as well, because even if you don't commercialize that particular trial, having that body of knowledge consolidated in one place could become valuable in the future. It could become valuable in terms of training your AI, and it could also become valuable because at some point that particular formulation with those particular technical and functional specs could be sold to someone else. So for many reasons, capturing all of your trial data and all of your trial test data is essential, and we want to make it as easy as possible to do that. Once we have all of that data, what's so great is that then you can pull correlated data in tabular format. So whether you just want to see what's a superset of everything that I have, you want to run some statistical analyses on, certain subsets of data, or you want to run AI, having data that's readily available like this, that's clean, that's consistent with that consistent ontology, enables you to do that. Statistical analysis is critical even if you don't run AI. And I think for a lot of companies, understanding deeply what are, for instance, correlating factors and what are causal relationships between inputs and outputs is critical. And so what we're seeing is that even just providing this level of incremental insight to what is happening in the context of formulations is critical and adds a lot of value out of the gate. Now, of course, the reason we're able to do this is because we have the AI-ready data, so it's very easy to run incremental analyses on that data, and it helps us as we're thinking about tuning our models and understanding, what's happening from an AI and a ML perspective. But overall, we think that there's a lot of value in just getting to this point for the majority of lab staff.
Just
please.
Just to note here, it's also important to say that just using visual analysis of the data, it can indicate that you haven't actually collected all the relevant data during your data collection process, and you need to go back and redesign and update your ontology to collect additional data points in order to make your use case feasible.
Definitely.
It's a critical part. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And then, AI model training and optimization is next. The reality is that if you can get that data in a suitable format, like CSV or, even made available through an API, then a data scientist can work with it, whether it's, our data science team, your own data science team, or any sort of third-party AI vendor. And often, there are some manual processes that take place in terms of model training. But the reality is that at some point when you do end up with a model that is selected, it's optimized, and you deploy it within the context of where lab staff are doing their work, you can really have a closed loop system where your model runs, it makes a recommendation, you test that recommendation, and again, the test results either validate or refute, or help you refine that model in some way. So having that closed loop system, I think, is critical in the long run in terms of scaling your AI. And really there's two primary use cases that we see for AI. One is to generate predictions. So, can the model tell us what particular technical or functional properties we should expect from a formulation on the one hand, and then on the other hand, can it recommend a formulation that might have particular technical and functional properties? And they kind of are yin and yang, and they really go together. And from our standpoint, whether it's the statistics, or it's actually providing predictions and recommendations, this really augments the whole DOE process, and really enables you to develop new products, I would say, in a way that's potentially much more informed than the more trial and error approach that takes place today. That's obviously based on people's educational background and years of experience, but at the end of the day, it kind of defaults to trial and error based on those two things. And what this does is really augments kind of the lines of creativity or the vectors of creativity that a chemist or a scientist can pursue in their testing. So I say finally, because I know we're moving through this deck, there are also detailed explanations of why that AI can help with. We call it explainability. But really what this shows is, okay, you know, we've built this model, we've tuned a model, we've run the model on a data set, and the model has produced, you know, a recommendation, for instance. And, you know, what were the factors that really caused the greatest impact to that outcome? You know, and in this case, you can see age and water cement ratio, you know, really having the most dramatic impact. And then, of course, fine aggregate and fly ash having the least dramatic impact. And this understanding of what's really going on is important because now all of a sudden, even if you don't have a background in statistics, even if you're not a data scientist, the answer, you know, what the model is suggesting, the why behind it becomes, you know, intuitive, relatively intuitive, just based on the magnitude of the bars in the bar chart. You know, Nicola, certainly if you have anything to add here, please do so. But you know, my background is not data science, and what I really appreciate about this is that it makes all of the math and statistics and the modeling in the background really clear to someone who's at the bench in terms of, you know, what's really happening here in this formulation. Nicola, do you have anything to add to this?
No, it's just that to know that having this integrated into your UI really helps both like a senior chemist and a junior chemist to understand the impact of different ingredients, different properties, different steps in the formulating process and how they affect the final target variable. So that makes it really clear based on, and this is all based on the data that is collected throughout your organization. So that's how all this explainability is calculated.
Yeah, yeah, that's the benefit of having consolidated all of the information in one place. You know, the model brings that all to bear in terms of making sense of it, and then provides the recommendation. And obviously, subsequent testing on that recommendation will, you know, further reinforce the model, or basically provide data that would indicate the model needs to be tweaked in some way.
One more thing that to add here is, apart from explainability, what's also what we feel is important when getting the predictions is to also calculate the confidence interval, if possible, based on the model that is applied, because that shows you exactly where your model is strong and you can basically trust the predictions, and where your model is weak and further testing is necessary. And then that allows you to do like more informed DOE and planning.
Excellent. Yep. Thank you. And then, you know, in summary, I think there's some really critical takeaways for every company. I mean, the reality is much like software, you know, every company runs software to enable their operations. At some point in the future, every company will run AI. It will become ubiquitous, just like software. We highly suggest for companies to prioritize go forward clean data capture. The reality is that that will enable you to analyze the project work and the technical data that you already have at a significantly more sophisticated way. It could help you optimize your current business processes, and of course, it could also feed your AI models. We believe that whatever AI approach you're planning to take, it's useful to commit to a strategy or some combination of strategies and to make those clear, because again, just referencing a slide that was much earlier in the deck, every strategy has different people, process, and IT or software implications. And so if you are going to pursue a particular strategy, then you need to make sure that your people, processes, and your technology really are aligned. We would also encourage everyone to act with urgency. So, I think like in a lot of fields, learnings, both positive and negative, are valuable. And, the fast fail can sometimes be as important and impactful as the kind of slow and steady learn. And so we would encourage everyone to act with urgency as it relates to this. And then finally, we didn't really talk about this so much in the deck, but we would also encourage that, when looking for partners, to work with companies that value being open. The reality is that we're very much in an expanding tech ecosystem. Software needs to be able to communicate with other software and systems. And, if you work with partners that, have being open as a value, it will really pay dividends in the long run, because ideally, it's not just about the tech stack in your lab, it's also about your lab and how your lab is connecting to the rest of your business. So, from the opportunities that come in through your sales and marketing efforts, through all the product development and all the technical service work and application work that happens in the lab, all the way through to what ultimately gets manufactured and you have to support out in market. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kevin to field questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Great presentation, lots of wonderful information. So again, for folks maybe who joined a couple of minutes after the session started, please use the question function. It's going to be on the GoToWebinar panel. It's going to be on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see it. It's a little drop down there for questions, and you are able to go in there and ask questions. We won't read your name or we won't read your company. If you ask a question, we don't get to it, we'll do follow up with you to see if we can get it answered one-on-one. I'm going to stop the recording.